You should stay away from this guy. At my wedding, my 6-year-old niece pointed at him and declared. Since she was 2, she had shown a mysterious ability, and her words carried weight. However, her sudden statement at such a joyous occasion threw me into a panic. As I scrambled to handle the situation, she continued. Because this guy. Hearing what my niece revealed next, his face turned pale. I am Mina, 28 years old. I live with my parents, my brother, and my 6-year-old niece, Amy, at home. My brother lost his wife to illness 3 years ago and returned home with Amy, who was then 1 year old. Amy had just started walking, holding on to things. Her search for her mother, calling out Mama, was heartbreakingly earnest. We all doted on her, and she grew especially close to me. I was a single picture book author, working from home. One of my books became popular, and I started receiving substantial royalties. My brother wondered why I still lived at home despite my earnings. You could afford an apartment or a house, right? Don't you want to try living alone? But if I leave, I won't see Amy, right? I don't want that. I appreciate how you feel, but you need to find your own happiness too. You won't meet anyone staying at home all the time. Even my brother, still young, hadn't considered remarriage, focusing solely on raising Amy. As Amy grew, she started showing unusual abilities around age 2. For example, when our mother, always in a rush, lost her car keys, Amy brought them to her from somewhere, saying, "Here." She only smiled when asked where she found them. Once, on a clear day, she insisted on putting a foldable umbrella in my bag as I was leaving. I took it to stop her crying, and it turned out to be handy when a sudden downpour hit. The most shocking instance was when my brother couldn't use his car for commuting because Amy wouldn't let go of the keys. He had to take the train instead, and that day, a major accident occurred on his usual route. We all looked at each other, realizing he could have been involved had he driven. While we all found Amy a bit odd, we treated her like any other child, keeping her abilities a secret outside the family to prevent any strange looks. Amy's powers always seemed to manifest to help the family, and otherwise, she was a typical, adorable toddler. Then, one day, I finally met someone. At the library, while reading, a man approached me, saying, "That's an interesting book, isn't it?" We hit it off, sharing a love for reading and the same favorite authors. When I mentioned my picture books, his eyes lit up. I've been a fan. I recognized you from the author photo in the books afterward. I'm so happy to meet you in person. That's nice to hear. I live with my niece, and I often write books that I think she'd like. It seems a lot of children's book authors love kids. I love children too. I'd like to meet your niece someday. His interest in children's books seemed unusual for a single man, but he was kind and expressed a wish to meet Amy, which pleased me. My books have been well received, and there's talk of turning them into a series. Really? The royalties must be substantial. That's impressive. As Luke and I grew closer, we started dating, and he proposed. When I introduced him to my parents and brother after a date, his bright and confident responses won them over. But when I tried to introduce him to my niece, she simply said, "No," and hid away. It was unusual for her, as she wasn't shy around people. I asked her why, but she didn't answer. After that, whenever he came over, she would retreat to her room, clearly disliking his presence. This worried me, but there was something else on my mind too. Luke had lost his father when he was young, and since he had no relatives, his only family was his mother. But he couldn't introduce me to her. My mother just had major surgery and can't have visitors, he explained. That's worrisome, I replied. He then told me his mother's prognosis wasn't good and she had only 6 months to live. That's why I want to get married soon, to give her some peace of mind. I had planned to date him a bit longer before getting married, but hearing this, I decided to go ahead with the wedding. There's something I need to discuss. I want my mother to live as long as possible, so I'm planning to get her advanced medical treatment, which is expensive. That sounds like a good idea. I have some money in a time deposit, but it matures in a month. It would be a waste to withdraw it now. Is that so? I don't know much about these things. Could you lend me some money until it matures next month? I'll write you an IOU. Considering his situation, I arranged $20,000 for him. The following days were a whirlwind of choosing the venue, the dress, house hunting, and planning our honeymoon. I'd prefer to live near my parents' house if possible. I don't want to be far from my niece. I love that about you. Let's look for something close by. Thank you. Let's have our honeymoon domestically. I need to renew my passport, and it might take some time. That's fine. There are plenty of beautiful places here. There was a lot to decide, but those were happy and exciting days. Luke was to pay for our new home and the honeymoon with his maturing deposit. I felt secure leaving it to him. I paid the $1,000 deposit for the wedding, and the rest was to be paid later. I decided to cover all the expenses as I had many guests from my publishing contacts, friends, and relatives. I expected a considerable amount in wedding gifts, so the actual cost wouldn't be too high. He said he would have around 10 guests, his mother, a few relatives, his boss, and some friends. I was surprised at the small number. Is that all? I'll have about 150 guests. I only invited those who truly rejoice in our marriage. Since you have many guests, it's fine if mine are fewer. That's thoughtful. I'm sorry, I have many work-related guests. Maybe I should cut down the list. No, invite them all. The more guests, the more gifts we'll receive, right? Ahaha, just kidding. I want many people to see how beautiful you look. Luke said he would submit our marriage registration after the wedding, so I left it with him after filling it out. And then, the wedding day arrived. Dressed in my wedding gown, I entered the chapel with him, greeted by applause and feeling utterly blissful. That's when it happened. Amy ran up to us, blocking our way, and shouted with a determined look, pointing at him. You should stay away from this guy. I was initially startled by her outburst at such a joyous event, but then I noticed her eyes, tinged with blue, looking earnestly at me. Whenever she had shown her mysterious abilities since she was 2, her eyes would turn this shade. I must listen to what Amy has to say to the end. That was my instinctive feeling. My brother hurried over to pick up Amy and take her away, but I stopped him. Why should I stay away from him? Because, you know, the lady and the kid he lives with are crying. They seem hungry. They're saying they don't have any money. Hey. I'm single. The revelation that he was married with a child was shocking, but I couldn't believe Amy would lie. Also, he's been taking money from other grandparents. They're angry and want it back. What? Then, the money you got from Mina, did it all disappear at the casino? Why? How do you know that? The money I had given him was supposed to be for his mother's advanced medical treatment. Had he used it for gambling? As Amy continued to reveal more, Luke's face grew increasingly pale. What is this kid saying? Creepy. Stay away from me. His agitation made it clear that Amy was telling the truth. Then Amy continued. This man is trying to run away with a lot of money. The large sum of money at the venue had to be the wedding gifts. I quickly checked with a friend who had been at the reception desk. She was supposed to give it to me, but Luke had taken it, saying, I'll be the one to collect it. My brother hurriedly brought Luke's bag from the waiting room. Inside, we found all the wedding gift. You were planning to run off with the wedding gifts? No, I just took them to hand out to everyone later. That's all. I wasn't going to run away with them. His desperate pleas echoed emptily in the hall. At first, some guests were confused by our exchange, but soon it was clear to everyone that Luke was the villain. Even more shocking, his bag contained photos of his wife and child and his real driver's license. Luke, your name is different. What's going on? Perhaps realizing he couldn't make any more excuses, he tried to run, but a relative sitting nearby restrained him. Dad, call the police. As I shouted, Luke shook off his arm and knelt down, begging for forgiveness. I'm sorry for deceiving you. It was just a moment of weakness. It's too calculated to be just a whim. My daughter really loves Mina's books. Forgive me for her sake. My initial discomfort at a single man's interest in children's books was correct. It was influenced by his child. I was a perfect target for someone like Luke. Please, just don't call the police. The police are already here. As soon as my brother said this, several officers entered the venue. They dragged away the man, who was still prostrate on the ground, begging for mercy. I hate the police. Mina, help me. All I could do was stare blankly at the pitiful sight of this man. I was surprised at how quickly the police had arrived, but it turned out he had been marked by them for a while, suspected of swindling money from elderly people. They had solidified their suspicions and decided to intervene at the wedding. Moreover, the few guests he had brought were all hired strangers, causing a stir when they realized they weren't going to be paid as promised, which led to the police questioning them as well. In the end, we had to cancel the wedding. I apologized to the guests and returned all the wedding gifts. I'm immensely grateful to Amy for uncovering his secrets, although she fell asleep in my brother's arms, completely exhausted from the ordeal, soon after the commotion died down. The man was sentenced to prison, and I sued him for the $20,000 I had lent him, $40,000 for the wedding expenses, and an additional $20,000 for damages due to marriage fraud. He also faced divorce and claims for alimony and child support from his real wife. Others he had deceived were demanding repayment as well. Once out of prison, he faced a mountain of debt. To ensure he didn't run away, my uncle, who runs a deep-sea fishing business, agreed to take him on and keep him busy. It will surely be a long road for him. As for me, I've settled back into a peaceful life at my parents' home. Honestly, I was sad at the thought of living away from Amy, so perhaps things worked out for the best. Recently, while walking my dog, I bumped into a childhood friend from the neighborhood. Mina, I'm going to marry this guy, she blurted out unexpectedly. I was surprised, but it felt right. We knew each other well, and it meant I could stay close to Amy. Most importantly, if Amy approves of him, he must be the right choice. Now, we're happily starting our relationship.